Would you guys like to introduce yourselves? And
Yeah, Matt Sample, SVP of Manufacturer Quality and Replenishment Operations at Cencora, formerly known as AmerisourceBergen. Been doing this for not as long as you, but almost since 2013. So.
Very good. And you heard my intro before, but around Pfizer and all that stuff that I historic, but even right now, so to give some credibility why I'm up here as well, is that I can't tell you how many different clients I've been dealing with serialization for since joining NNIT over 2 years ago. I'm going to guess 30, 40, whatever it is, and aiding in their serialization journey towards compliance, et cetera. So between that and my Pfizer experience and RFID experience and all the above, that's why I sit here.
It's right here. Yep.
Oh.
That went too fast. Okay, so out of respect for time and what we've got left, we've got some great questions and conversations. So I'm going to just touch really briefly on these slides. So when Abba talked about the guidance that came out last August that announced the delayed enforcement, I think we collectively as an industry took a breath and then we just got busy and went right back to work. I mean, it was very brief. And so we had high expectations for 2024, what we were going to do with those 12 months. We have seen some increased activity from the FDA. We've seen a lot of readiness assessments. It's what we spend a lot of our time doing, is helping you guys make sure, are you compliant with DSCSA? Do you have your policies and procedures updated to reflect compliance with the DSCSA? And what we've started to see is kind of the next level of enforcement readiness, and that is, okay, now when the FDA comes in to audit me, how can I prove that I'm in compliance? So what am I doing to take that next step? Because you can write a procedure, you can talk the talk, but can you prove that you're compliant? Because when the FDA comes in, they're going to be looking to make sure that that's what's happening. So, and through the stabilization period, we've been talking about wrapping up onboarding and the challenges with that. We just talked about exception handling, and that's been another big part of the stabilization period, along with these policies and procedures and getting trading partners in alignment. So. What we want to do now for the rest of our time is talk about what else are we doing, what has happened during that stabilization period, and what are we doing to be ready for the enforcement discretion. So the first question for you, and Dennis, I know you're going to have to be creative with how you answer some of these with the hat that you're wearing today, but what milestones did you set during the stabilization period, and can you provide an update with your status to those milestones?
Yeah, so like we've done for the last 10 years, we've set trading partner expectations is what I'd call them. And so we had landed the plane on, we wanted, if I'm trying to remember this correctly, we wanted all data being sent to us by April 1st, 2024. And for those products, for whatever reason, we're not getting data over there because the line wasn't aggregated, you're turning through inventory, whatever it is, we wanted to know those list of products. So that milestone came and went. We are at about 82% of our NDCs we're receiving data for, about 84% of our receipts are getting data. And I think we had 2 or 3 manufacturers tell us a list of products that weren't ready. So that milestone really didn't do much. What I will say we did was we did establish within our generic community, we did set the expectation that on June 1st, for those manufacturers that aren't making progress, aren't ready, or just aren't showing a goodwill to be there, we are going to, where we have the ability within our commercial relationships, start bidding out awards away from manufacturers to manufacturers that are ready. Cost neutral. We'll pay 5 cents more if we're going to go work where a manufacturer is much more reliable. Now, the caveat with that is we only control about 15 to 20% of our buy side decisions. So there's still another 80% where I have no commercial muscle to flex. But that's where we're at. So, and I will say we have plateaued. I mean, it's been like 79, 80, 81, 82% over the last 4 months. So as far as I'm concerned, we've stagnated at this point on receiving of data.
Yeah, so now I'll speak a little bit from a manufacturing perspective on this one. So again, there's a spectrum of different people out there, or different companies, and where they're at in their journey. There's the ones that are really using stabilization period just to fine tune things, and there's other ones that are still implementing things, right? But it's all going to boil down to this, right? If you break apart the law, there's X number, and you saw Abba go through quite a few of the specific regulation points there. There's X number of regulation points in there. There's direct compliance points that you have to hit. Then there's the ones that will say support compliance points. And then you have some nice to haves, maybe it's your efficiencies in supply chains, things of that nature. And it's really, honestly, going through that and checking those boxes, say, have I looked through the DSCSA in my role in the supply chain and all the different transactions? Keep in mind, even though you might be a manufacturer, maybe I'm also acting as a wholesaler too, or a repackager or something like that. You got to look at the transactions you're doing and then check mark each of those compliance and or supporting regulations and or functions to support that to make sure it's there. So to me, I'm not going to give you these X different milestones. It's really just looking at your readiness, but you have to break it down. You have to understand the law and go through that based on what you do as a business. And again, keep in mind, you may be doing more than one role in the supply chain.
Can you guys talk a little bit about how when your partners are not ready, how does that impact you and your ability to be ready for enforcement in 6 months, less than 6 months?
It sucks being in the middle. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, if we handle it from a pure DSCSA lens first. If we have a manufacturer not sending us data, in theory, we aren't able to provide the data to the customers in the simplest sense, right? If I don't get that original commissioning event, I can't send data to the customers. Now, we have within our systems been able to create what we call pseudo-commissioning events where we can still create the outbound data without the inbound, but that doesn't really work for cases because I'm not going to open a case. So we've had some of that where we've been able to limp forward. The implication, and I go back to these milestones, the problem with the stabilization period, it didn't set phase gates like we had hoped with the phase implementation, where it said, hey, let the manufacturers and wholesalers get this right and then pivot, because we started having customers getting mad at us 2 months in saying, where's my data? We're like, well, hold on. I haven't got it figured out from the manufacturer. So it is obviously a ripple effect. Now, I'll put my other hat on, which is product availability and product access. If I have a manufacturer not ready, if I look at the data now, 25% of all our shipments to the NDC show up with a product without data. And those are of the manufacturers sending data. That's 350,000 units a day I will take out of the supply chain. So you ask the question, what's the ripple effect? Forget DSCSA. It's product, patient, safety, access, all the above. So,
again, Matt's in an unenviable position being in the middle, as he said, right? And a manufacturer, we answered this question actually in the two prior sessions ago. Reality is if you're a manufacturer and you have someone you're supplying product to that is not ready, you just need to do your diligence. You need to do diligence to make sure you try to engage them. You try to do whatever you can do. You are still actually providing the data, and if you're not going to be able to get an EPCS connection, you probably won't if they don't want to engage. Use a portal, get the data out there, make sure you have record that. Maybe record it as a deviation in your system or something like that. Somehow make sure you have record that shows you did everything you can do to make sure that you can comply with the DSCSA. And after that, there's not much you can do. Right? Do your best to protect yourself. You can't say that because you're relying on people getting it to you. That's a different story.
I do have a way to protect myself.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So they're totally going to segue here, but one of the things we've been talking about around risk. So I have the ability to create a WE for receiving inbound transaction information and sending transaction information for a set of NDCs. Mm-hmm. So what we as a corporation are contemplating is for all those NDCs that I'm not getting data for, not getting consistently, I'm going to create a WE. And in doing so, I'm going to provide a list of NDCs to the FDA for those manufacturers that aren't ready.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
Yep. It's genius. It's going to confuse the hell out of my customers, but it's genius. Yeah.
Well, you may have just answered my next question. I was going to ask about grandfathering.
That's a
different topic.
When I say grandfathering, I don't mean grandfathering a product that doesn't have a serial number, because that should have already been flushed through this play. It's been long enough. Product that is shipping now without data that you're sitting on, because it's not all going to sell through by November.
Yep.
So November, how are you mitigating those risks? What are you thinking?
So we've been calling this transitional inventory versus grandfathering.
I like that better.
Yeah, so it's, and I'm trying to know if the FDA position paper, we said, well, look, we could still sell this post-November 2024 if we received an ASM for that lot. Right, so we've kind of built our systems to say, hey, go ahead and ship this, create a pseudo commissioning event after doing that check. The question still is, for how long? Mm-hmm. So we haven't done any assessments. I mean, at the end of the day, and probably about 3 months before November, we're going to have to take a step back and say, let's look at our inventory turns. What products are at risk? Because we have no clue in the warehouse what has data or not. We're not going to go out and edit it or audit it. But we're going to start looking at inventory turns to try and figure out where is that drop dead date, where are we getting data, where are we not getting data. We have also stopped doing special one-time buys for manufacturers that aren't sending data, because that'll just get us even more and more in the hole. And we have had a lot of manufacturers come out and say, hey, we'll cut you a deal if you can take this non-aggregated product, which we were fine last year, but this,
Right.
we've cut that off.
Right.
And Matt really answered the question from a manufacturer's perspective. Bottom line, you need to start sending your data as soon as possible. And then secondly, you need to, at least for what inventory you have on hand, because again, you might not get it right away. What do you have on hand that's not gonna be able to be sent with data, et cetera? Try and figure out how you can bleed it out or maybe rework that product. So the point is you gotta do everything you can to get your product that has data with it to these guys, because then you have no risk on your supply chain, right? Again, keep in mind, it's not just a compliance risk, it's a revenue risk too.
Just because it's Super Mario Brothers, we'll let it go.
Kind of goes with Gru, apparently.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit with what you guys are doing? And I guess I'm speaking more to Matt here. You can share from our experience, but what are you doing to get ready for an audit? I mean, the FDA hasn't come out and said anything other than we're adding DSCSA to the audit agenda and we're training our folks.
Do you want to go first on this one?
Want me to go first?
You go first.
Yeah, so this is actually quite a hot topic, as Karyl mentioned, her, myself, Chris, others. Again, we're supporting a lot of different clients on this. And the reality is you're going to look for three major things. This is a kind of very standardized thing, right? This is what the FDA comes. If you've never been through an FDA audit, you need to experience one. They're kind of quite fun. First of all, they want to see a process. It's got to be documented. And then they want to see evidence that it's been executed, right? If you have a process not documented, guess what? The FDA doesn't care. If you have a process and you've documented and you don't show evidence that it's actually been working that way, guess it doesn't, you're no good. So again, going back to what we talked about, those milestones, the way I answered that question before, again, it's breaking down the DSCSA and making sure you have support on all that. But understand, you have the direct requirements, but then you have it in your operations, in your warehouse, and make sure you have these things executing properly and whatever logs you need. Maybe it's going back to, we talked about exception handling. To make sure you have logs and show that you're documenting the exceptions that were compliant exceptions that need to be documented. So it's, do you have a process? Is it documented? And do you and can you provide evidence that it's being executed on a regular basis? If you can do those three things across the regulation and all the operations supporting the getting your products out and that are touched by the regulation, that's what you really need to do.
Yeah, so for us, we've got a bigger hurdle. Agree with everything he said, but having come from manufacturing to the wholesale distribution space, and you could say the same thing about dispensers, we are not under GMP. Get into debate of why not, but the reality is we're not. So what that means is we don't have the mature quality management systems, the even ISO 9001, just the pure structure in place that would even facilitate providing the FDA what they're asking for. So what we've done, at least with the Cencora the last year or so, we've made major organizational changes with our regulatory team. We're talking about it as quality operations. We're not talking about how we've historically talked about it. We've actually put in master control. We're revamping policy to work instruction, top to bottom, not just DSCSA and across the board, basically structuring ourselves very GMP-like. And in parallel, lots of conversations within HGA around having some best practices on what to do when the FDA walks in. I mean, I think even McKesson would admit the way they handled the 483 in the morning letter wasn't the, don't have your lawyers tell the FDA go pound sand, is not step one. And so we're really vetting out and starting to do dry runs with what does it look like when the FDA walks in. Now, the other side for us is boards of pharmacies typically are the ones that audit us, and we're already starting to see this. And we're already starting to see variability. NABP is out there right now saying 503B, compounding agencies are in scope. They're saying vet clinics are in scope. And so we're trying to work through NABP to get to their members to say, hey, and been telling the FDA, you have to do an education outreach to the states. Because ultimately they're the ones going to audit the dispensers and the wholesalers. The FDA will probably audit us as well. So we're trying to balance, how do we handle when the FDA comes in, and then how do we handle when VOD asks for, well, it's not VOD anymore, NABP asks for something that isn't even right. So we're trying to juggle both of those.
Yeah. And if Karyl, can I just add to that too, because Matt triggered another thought that we do as well, is really pressure, I think Kristen said it before as well, is pressure test your processes and systems. You have to practice. That was the word it was being used before. You're not going to get it day one. There's too much going on here. So you really got to pressure test this, and you got to think about how can you either get it in practice while we're still in the stabilization period, so you have some grace period. But if that's not enough, then you might need people to support you. You think about how do you create a program that challenges your business as usual state and make sure everything you're doing is actually working smoothly in
Yep.
accordance.
Yeah, we've actually had a couple CAPAs during that, the serial number incident Greg had talked about. We realized we brought that back and should have treated it like a recall because we ended up treating it like a sale return. So we're already started opening CAPAs and deviations already with the stable. So we're, again, taking advantage of stabilization by doing that, so.
All right, Scott, I have one more question for these guys and open it up to
Yeah.
questions. Is that cool? Okay.
Works for me.
So kind of wrapping all of the rest of this stuff together, we've talked about exceptions, we've talked about onboarding, we've talked about a few other issues. What outstanding issues that we haven't talked about yet do you see as being a gap to enforcement?
So I think it's, the big question is what do we do in November?
Yeah.
It's been something we're talking within the HDA membership. We're trying to figure out what is our position. I can unequivocally say from our position as Cencora and HDA, we don't want to mimic what happened in August because what happened in August had the effect that 30 some odd manufacturers took the foot off the gas.
Yep.
We hear from manufacturers, dispensers are waiting until the end, right? We don't, that was our fear. Net result, we need the agency to start auditing. We need the agency to start auditing manufacturers first. They should audit us too, make sure we at least have the processes in place. So we're trying to figure out, the industry's not going to be ready to turn everything on hard errors. We're not going to be ready. That's the reality. If we try that, we are going to, as Greg talked about the trucks, 8 trucks of Teva going back, right? We cannot do that to this market. We don't want to create a shortage situation. We don't want to create anxiety around that with the congressional view on shortages today. So we're trying to figure out what is our position? What is our recommendation to go forward? Because we just can't, I've been doing this for 11 years. I can't do this anymore. I think we're all getting to that point, like, is enough, and I think the agency is too.
Well, and it's, in a person like you guys, or a company like you guys have been doing the right thing. You have a lot of companies that have been doing the right thing, and you're almost getting penalized because you did the right thing versus the late actors are coming at the last second. And to me, this comes back to the word, I'll use the word neglect is what I'm going to use. So if you're a person out there, or a company out there that's been doing the right thing, trying to get the right compliance in play, but it's not working perfectly. Somehow it'd be nice if the FDA could recognize that.
Yep.
Great, fine. We know we didn't do transactions right, but we're trying. We're trying to do our best. We're improving it. We couldn't make it quite through the stabilization period. However, then you have another company that just started or didn't do anything. We want to see somehow can the FDA, in my opinion, how can they look at those that are being neglective of trying to be compliant versus the ones that are trying are just struggling.
Yeah.
Let's get some leniency there. Let's not give leniency on the other side. And by the way, we know the upper supply chains can be in a bit of a better position. There's going to have to be some level more leniency downstream just because of the nature of the supply chain.
Yep.
To me, I look at that word negligent or neglect from even trying versus someone that has been attempting and doing a good.
I've been using laggard a lot.
That works.
Negligent laggards.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Perfect.
works, okay. The one thing I'll add, one of the things we're struggling with on that note, like what keeps me up at night, we really are as a company struggling, and this is going to risk committee. I mean, it's getting to a board level discussion. What is the bigger risk? Not being compliant or not shipping 300,000 patient doses a day? Like, are we going to get sued for this or are we going to get sued for that, right? And that's what we're really weighing with because our job is to get the drugs to the dang patient.
Well,
So-
and that's what the pharmacist deals with, too, the
Yeah.
patient on the other side of the counter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of murmur,
Yeah.
and you heard it at HD and other times,
Yeah.
there's a lot of murmur about, I'm still gonna get it to the patient, right?
Yeah,
And
CVS
it's-
keeps saying, I'm still going to get it to the patient. We're like, yeah, but you're not going to get the drug from us because we can't.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, we have a couple minutes left for questions. Is there any in the room? Yep. Is there any online that have come in?
Thanks for sharing. With respect to the light GMP, why didn't you go with the GDP model? The European model, Chuck Forsyth is doing this GDP accreditation through HDA.
Yep.
I know that's more focused on the
Carrier
service
transportation.
providers,
Yep.
But you as warehouseman, how about GDP?
I would say our SOPs and work instructions will align with GDP. I'm taking more the overall management reviews. What we're trying to do is actually establish ourselves to mirror ISO 9001, which will then naturally fit in with all that other stuff. So.
More robust.
Yes, yes, yeah.
The last question.
Hey, Dennis, just one comment. On your FDA readiness, don't forget training.
Yeah, training records,
100%.
yeah.
It's part of the execution, but that's
Yep.
one of the hot topics is making sure the people that are doing the work are properly trained.
Yeah, the audits that I've been part of have been Do you have everything documented? Can you explain them? And then go out and watch the process and talk to the frontline people and say, how did you know, do you know where to go to get the process? And do you know what you're doing? Why are you doing it this way? So you're absolutely right, yeah.
Question in the back.
I know this was kind of asked rhetorically at the end, but when you do come up with the $300,000 shipment versus compliance, what are you going to do?
I don't have my attorney here right now. In all seriousness, we will probably submit a week on, because the construct of it actually works really well. I've already given an FDA, we were meeting with the FDA's HTA, and there was probably 6 or 7 of them. And when we were talking about WEs, we were concerned on the speediness of getting a WE. And I said, I got a question for you. And I said, what if I did this? I'm basically saying, I'm ready, but these guys aren't. And their faces were like, huh? So we're going to probably do it. The bigger question we're trying to figure out is the FDA can also do a WE. We want to encourage them to submit that same WE, but for the industry. Because then that way that takes the confusion out. Because if I get a WE and McKesson doesn't and the dispenser's buying from Chua, they're going to like, why am I getting data here and not here? There'll be a mix of that. That'll be my risk mitigation. Now you get into the how long, how do you monitor it, how do you phase that in? Those are all other questions, or we'll talk about that next year. So.
The nice thing about that process, though, Matt, is in theory, should be something that then allows the FDA then to correct, is the point, which is it's the beauty of it.
It's a beautiful idea, yeah.
Absolutely.
3 beers. 3 beers and I came up with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you guys.